Hi, everybody. Thanks to be here for this talk. This is part of a tour. So since 3 weeks, I'm touring North America. If you want to tweet or to use Mastodon, Blue Sky, or whatever, I would ask you to use this hashtag. There is a trick among speakers that normally you would tell an anecdote to connect with the attendees at the beginning of the talk. I generally don't do that because nobody cares. I mean, you are here to listen to the technical stuff. But today, I want to make an exception. This is my second time at Scale. Yeah, thanks. But that's not what I want to tell you. The first time, I want to tell you about my first time at Scale. It was part, again, of a couple of presentations in California. I was supposed to do 2 talks in Los Angeles, 1 talk at Scale. Then in the same week, I would fly to Romania. And then on Friday to fly to Turkey. And then Monday afterwards to fly to Australia, which was pretty stupid, but hey. And it was the week before COVID. So of the 2 talks that are supposed to take place in San Francisco, one of them was canceled. The other, I did it online, in my room. I was in the other building. There were 10 people. Then Romania called and said, it's canceled. So I rebooked to Turkey, and then they canceled too. I was able to fly back to my airport on Saturday, and on Monday, everything was closed. The whole world closed. I live in France, so nearly I didn't leave my place for 2 years. In France, the lockdown was very strongly enforced. You could go outside for, I think there were 5 reasons. One of them were groceries, but you just wanted to go outside to take a walk. It was 1 hour and not 1 kilometer further away from your place. So for me, Scale is reminds me this. So I'm very happy to be here again because I want to exorcise this memory from me. So I hope that it will end up much better. I'm Nicolas Fränkel. I've been consultant for 17 years. I was in projects. I was in different positions. And then if you are doing project as well, you know about deadlines, changing requirements, sometimes toxic management. So I decided to live this life, and now I'm a developer advocate. So as I mentioned, it's a basic talk, so I want to bring you back to how does it work at the most basic level. So this is Kubernetes. This is the definition of a pod object. At the beginning, I will go through a demo. At the end, unfortunately, I have tried it, and it takes too long, so I will do the slides, unfortunately. But let's start with our cluster. Since I don't want to do to depend on any cloud provider, I'm using Kind, so Docker and Kubernetes. And here I want to create the Kind cluster. So I just copy-paste everything. And now that's the beginning of the problem. Yeah, OK. So my ID, I want to show you the config. My idea is to have 2 nodes. I want to have a Kubernetes cluster with 2 nodes, so I cannot use the default Docker one for a reason that I will show you afterwards. So there should be something like this. I should have 2 nodes. First thing first, I will deploy my first node. Amazing. Before doing that, I need to preload the images. That's how it works. And because I'm super lazy, I will replace kubectl with k because. So I create the deployment. So randomly, because I have no affinity or whatever, Kubernetes will assign my pod to one of the nodes. And then I can query the node, and I can ask about its IP. Yeah. Sorry, that's very good feedback, sorry. So I have asked, thanks for your feedback. Sorry, if you are in the back, you cannot see everything. Here it should be better. So I ask about its IP, and it returns me its IP. Okay, because I don't trust it, perhaps I can ask not Kubernetes, but the pod itself about its IP. So I go into the pod, I exec and give me your host name. It's still the same. So now I'm pretty sure it's his IP. So great. The problem is I cannot rely on this IP because in Kubernetes, as you know, the pods, they are cattle. They are not pets. They come and they go. So if I delete the pod and I make sure that I have no pods, no, I still have a pod. It's just that Kubernetes, because I used a deployment, recreated the pod automatically. But it's not the same pod. If I ask about its IP, the previous IP was 1.2, this IP is 2.2. So the problem is that pods, we cannot rely on the IP of pods. They are ephemeral, and their IP as well. They will be assigned randomly. So in order to compensate, we could ourselves, by the way, we could ourselves like register some controller that listen to pods coming and going, and then keeping the list. But in order to do that, that would be a lot of issues, and Kubernetes allows us to do that through the service. So there is a service object, and now we can get the service and the service itself, called Nginx, here as a stable IP. And this IP, regardless of the pod, is stable across all deployments. So this is good. Unfortunately, this IP is internal. So we solved the problem of stable IP, but it's internal. So let's delete everything. And now I need to deploy something with a deployment. Just checking that it's on the right branch. Yes. So here, I will have two pods. I will have one pod, and it will return me, it's an Nginx pod, it will return me the hostname and the server and the IP through the service. And now, I change the service to a NodePort. So if I apply it, and I curl it, that's pretty good. So now I have a stable IP to call. I can curl the stuff. Because I'm using kind, I have mapped this port. it goes to the service, and it goes to the pod. That's pretty good. If I remove the pod, just like as before, Kubernetes will notice that the pod is missing, and because I have a deployment underneath, it will create a pod to replace it. And if I curl it again, I have a different IP, but it's still there. So because I'm using a service, I don't care which pod it is. I'm just accessing whatever the service gives me. That's good. We are accessing our pod from outside the cluster. Now, we will scale it. Normally, because I have, because I have 2 nodes, I should get one of each of them. So one pod should go to one of the nodes, which is the case here, and the other should be to the other node. So if you have any experience with Kubernetes, what do you think should happen if I curl repeatedly the service? Which pod should the traffic be forwarded to? Yeah. Yeah, it's about half-half, right? Good. Now I want to talk to you about the next service, the next object. So this was our thing. The service, the NodePort, does load balancing. But you know probably there is an object called LoadBalancer, which is funny. And the idea of LoadBalancer is not that its main feature is not about load balancing. It's a very badly named object, and it was to compensate at the time that cloud providers wanted to give you more features, and there was nothing at the time. So the idea is there is something called this load balancer, and you should replace load balancer by specific cloud provider stuff. As I mentioned, I don't want to depend on any cloud provider, so I'm using something called metal-LB, which allows me to install a load balancer object on my machine. Normally, if I go there, I should have something here. So I can get some CRDs out from the internet. And now I can install metal-LB itself. We will wait a bit until it's considered OK. Normally, 20 seconds timeout should be OK. I need to check if the range of IP is the same as in my. So it should be yes. OK, that seems to be good. Timed out. Let's see. I'm still waiting for one of them. OK. So this metal-LB stuff is very specific. That is not important. This is just for this kind of load balancer. What is interesting is this one. Now I can replace the NodePort with load balancer, and normally I should have the same things as before. So yes, we are also doing load balancing, also through a service, but now we replace NodePort with load balancer. What do we need to do more? The thing is, at the moment, all of our pods are the same. What if not the pods, they are not the same? We need to somehow route some requests to some pods and some other requests to other pods. And that's the reason why Kubernetes provides the Ingress object. That's the idea, to do some routing. There are lots and lots of implementation of Ingress on the market. So I'm using Apache API 6 in general, because I work for Apache API 6. But there are lots of them, probably, I couldn't list all of them. Just 2 slides about Apache API 6. You wanted the previous slide, so I give you the previous slide. Yeah, no, that's customer service. You also wanted the previous slide. Okay, that's, again, customer service. No, everybody has taken their picture now? Good. So Apache API 6 is an API gateway. I assume you are familiar with the Apache Foundation, right? You might not know that in order to give a project to the Apache Foundation is a multi-step process. So first you give the project, you give the IP, you give everything. And that means at that time you join the incubator. And in order to be considered a top-level project, to be like fully mature, fully adult, you need to fulfill a couple of steps. One among them is there must be committers from different companies. So it's a pretty old project, not 20 years, but already 4 years old. It's based on Nginx, so very stable, very mature project, very good reverse proxy. Who knows about Nginx? Yeah. The biggest flaw about Nginx in its open source version, if you need to change the configuration, you need to switch it off and on again, which is not super great if it sits at the entry point of your information system. So for that, there is something called OpenResty. OpenResty allows you to change the configuration through Lua code. And so you have solved the dynamic reload problem. Thing is, OpenResty configuration maps quite one-to-one to Nginx configuration. So for big project, it's not that great. Apache API 6 provides you with abstractions such as what is a service, what is a route, what is an upstream, and everything is plugin based. That were my only 2 marketing slides. So I want to talk to you about Ingress. When you deploy an Ingress, actually you do deploy 2 pods and 2 services. The first one is, sorry, ooh. Yes. So here you deploy the pod of the gateway itself, and you deploy your own pod. And so you will have a couple of additional steps. So when a request enters it, you will first hit the Ingress service that will direct forward the request to the Ingress pods, and the Ingress pod will probably forward it to the service of the real pod that you want to hit, and goes like this. So for this, I unfortunately won't do any demo, because I've checked and it takes a bit too much time. So unfortunately, I won't do the demo, but the idea is you are able to actually do some routing. You can, and you probably will, use different Ingress instances inside your cluster. Each instance can actually use a specific implementation. That's pretty good. But there are issues with ingresses. I will use the simple use case of API versioning. So you probably are using some kind of APIs. There are 3 ways to version your APIs: through like a prefix, path-based, through a query parameter. To be honest, I've never seen it, but well, you can do it, or through a header. That's a very good use case for routing, right? We want to like forward some V1 to a specific service and V2 to another service. But the problem is, imagine we want to have path-based routing, which Ingress controller supports. How do we remove the prefix? Because if we forward V1 / whatever to the upstream, then the upstream will receive V1 whatever, and we just want to receive whatever. The Ingress controller, by default, doesn't offer anything to remove the prefix. Okay, what can we do? Well, it depends on your implementation. So this abstraction actually is very lightweight. In order to kick in the features of your implementation, you can use annotations. So here I'm using Apache API 6, and you see that we can rewrite some stuff. Problem solved. Good. But unfortunately, it's not an abstraction anymore, since the idea behind an abstraction is I could easily move from one Ingress controller specific implementation to another one. But here, I cannot anymore. Second issue, it only supports path-based routing. If I want to use header-based routing, which is not a bad idea, I cannot anymore. That's a second problem. Third problem. Imagine that here you have your Ingress, and now your developers, they want to update this. And your company is big enough, you have different teams that want to route to different services. They are all working on the same file. They are all working on the same object. From an organizational point of view, how long do you think it will take until somebody overwrites something that another team wrote? Well, probably the bigger the organization, the more people are working on the same file, the less time. So for that, we have the solution. You have custom CRDs. You have something, for example, called API 6 route. So you install the CRDs, you use the namespace, and then every team can use their own route. Or even better, you can have one route per file or one file per team. And then you have all routes inside. What I told you about migrating from one Ingress implementation to another. It was hard before, now it's even worse. So that's not great. To compensate with all those issues, we have the gateway API. Who was in the other room at that previous talk? Okay, I will be even, I will only talk about a little of what was talked in the other room. The other talk was much more advanced on this. The idea is to fix the problems of the Ingress controller. Not all the problems, but most of the problems. For example, we will split the Ingress into multiple objects. We won't have one single controller with all the routes beneath. We will have different objects. We will widen the features offered so that we can do query-based routing or header-based routing, and lots of other stuff. What I like in this gateway API is that it tries to model how people are actually working, how teams are organized. In general, teams are organized. There is one team that provides the whole cluster, and that they're like these guys, they configure the gateway or the ingress. And then you have apps team that manage their own stuff. And so for every level of responsibility, there is one object. So there is one gateway class. To be honest, there was also an ingress class before, but now it's modeled. And there is the gateway that you can let your team dedicated to configuring the gateway handle the gateway. And finally, we have the HTTP routes. So previously, this was a CRD that was specific for here API 6. Others might have the same object or not. But now we have dedicated HTTP route object. And then I was telling you about routing. So now we have path matching, we have header matching, and we have query param matching. So every single issue that I mentioned before, the use case about versioning, where previously you had no choice but to use path-based, now you can use whatever you want. We have the regular namespace. So at the moment, we still need to install CRDs, but those CRDs, they are part of the like Kates.io namespace. They are not custom to one product. And HTTP routes here does the exact same that I did before. Here, just for fun, I use the query params. So now if I have the query param with name v and value 1, it directs me to the backend v1. But we can do better. No rewriting before, unless you used custom annotations. Now, we have filters, so we can do URL rewriting, either path-based or fully rewriting. I told you about the multiple ingress controllers. It's like the same. So the idea is it becomes closer to real abstraction, where you can actually use an object, use the specification, and then you can more or less change the implementation. But be careful, it's still not all implementations are the same at the moment, because it's still a new specification. So for example, here, I won't lie to you, Apache IPv6 is lacking in some ways. The rewrite rule is not supported. You cannot, at the moment, specify the gateway or the gateway class. You must be very careful with the gateway API. It looks super shiny, it looks super nice. It has been released November last year, finally. So it was first alpha, beta. Now it has been released officially. But I wouldn't say the paint is a bit fresh, let's say. Worse, the implementation, they are not all at the same level of implementation. So depending on your implementation, depending on the provider that you are using, you must be careful. The gateway API aims to be a wider abstraction. The Ingress controller was very limited as an abstraction. You still had to use a lot of custom annotation or CRDs. The gateway API aims to widen it. But widening doesn't mean that it's actually 100%. So you might find yourself in a situation where, hey, you want to use the gateway API, you are using the gateway class and the gateway and the routes, and you still need to use some implementation-specific trick to achieve what you want. So this is a bit too optimistic, but it's still a good thing. I was a bit faster than I expected. I'm sorry for that. On the good side, that you will have a longer break for. Yeah, you are. Yeah. So I see that it makes you happy. In case we will still have time for questions. In case you want to follow me on Twitter, on Mastodon, or on Blue Sky, and if I got you interested in Apache API 6, and now we have some time for questions. Yes.
For the API 6 Ingress, does it support other protocols, or is it still just HTTP, HTTPS?
No, you can use TCP and UDP as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. So the question was about Apache API 6. If the question is the routes of the gateway API, they also, I know there is a TCP route, and I think there is a UDP route, but I won't put my hand on fire just for that. But you can check. That's a good question. Just it widens the scope, but you might find yourself saying, hey, it doesn't support it. But TCP, I'm pretty sure. I've read it, yeah. Another question for the same price. That's amazing.
Can you speak to TLS and HTTP2 support? Is there anything special that one would have to look out for?
There is a TLS route, if I remember well. The specification has a TLS route.
Okay. And HTTP2, is there anything special, or is that generally handled?
Honestly, I don't know. Sorry, I reserve myself the right to say I don't know. But if I know, I will try to answer.
Anyone else?
So can you tell us a little bit about the load balancer used on your local machine?
Sorry, again?
So, yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the load balancer used for your local machine?
Yeah, so I use something called Metal LB. So normally, you would use some kind of virtual load balancer provided by your cloud provider. But since I want it to be self-contained, I use something called Metal LB, which you can install directly on your hardware. So no need for no cloud provider, which is great, amazing, no lock-in.
So to follow up with that, have you had any issues with that? It's fine.
I am a developer advocate nowadays, so I'm the king of Hello World. So production experience, I'm afraid that I'm not the good person to ask.
Thank you.
Is there any native integrations with...
Sorry, could you speak louder? At my age, I cannot hear anything.
Is there any native integrations with Let's Encrypt or like Cert Manager to manage
Integration
TLS?
with, sorry?
Let's Encrypt or like Cert Manager to do.
Could you come closer? Sorry, I really cannot understand you. Sorry about that.
Are there any native integrations with like Let's Encrypt or Certbot to manage
Sorry?
TLS certificates?
Let's encrypt. At which point? At the Apache API 6 level, at the Ingress controller level, or the Gateway API level?
Gateway API or Ingress?
I have no clue. To the extent of my knowledge, no. But at least on the Apache API 6 side, it's completely orthogonal. So probably what I assume is you would have another system to manage the certificates, and then you just use them in your Gateway API or Ingress controller implementation. But apart from that, no.
Any other questions?
Enjoy your lunch. Thanks a lot.
Okay, join me in thanking Nicolas for a great presentation.